Bless the food that's been prepared, and bless the fellowship around the tables. Help us just to have a good time and to enjoy each other. We pray this in the name of Jesus. And all God's people said,
Amen.
Amen.
Join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Join me with the four-way test. First,
Is it truth?
second,
Is it fair to all concerned?
third,
Will it build goodwill and better friendships?
fourth.
Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, L.E. John? John?
Yes. Yes. Oh, you want John?
Not John.
Go ahead, John.
Sean.
Sorry about that. Yeah, it is. It's actually the Irish News. So there you go. So it was nice of LD being able to say he's never prayed with me bodily in front of us. The bourbon might have been elsewhere. Bourbon, but nobody's saying anything about Shadow Day. So today, all of us are some sleep deprivation. Our Bengals didn't do so well last night. John Sires has commentary that he will give you about 20 minutes of. Anytime you're ready today. But I can't get into it anymore. So we'll play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers next week at home. The franchise, the Oaks franchise of Major League Baseball has a new manager, Coach David Bell, grandson of Gus Bell. So the Reds entering their 150th year in 1869. So you know, you remember that was a long time ago. Gary Stewart, remember that team? Yeah, that's right. Moeller, there you go. Moeller High School, yeah. Mighty Men of Mo, I shoot. There you go. So that's up. Let me see. Dow is down and NASDAQ is up. All the financial guys in here will be after the meeting, letting you know why that's occurring. Hey, or not. We have one visitor with us today, Mr. Howard Tankersley. Howard, would you stand and be recognized, please? You want to tell us what you do?
Thanks, Sean. I'm Howard Tankersley. I'm an attorney and I practice law at the Children's Law Center. I represent children in high conflict custody cases and other matters. And I also happen to be a candidate for family court judge. Election on November 6th. Consider it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. That's all, sir. You look good with that bottle of bourbon in front of you.
Guest speakers donated this to the club, and we'll be auctioning it off. Retail value of about $200. So thank you for your generosity.
Holy smokes.
So we've got about 7 different announcements, and I think I'm going to be making all of them. As you can see on the table, it's World Polio Day, and our fight against polio still continues. Today we all got stickers, and before everybody leaves today, we've got a smaller group. If we could get together in the front, take pictures so we can put on some social media and bring more awareness. Is that okay with everybody? We'll try to get out of here about 2 or 3 minutes early to do so. All right. I also put a piece of paper on your tables. It's about the 3rd annual foundation dinner, November 9th. Has anybody ever attended this dinner? There's a 3rd annual. I know I've been to one. Sean, Terry. It's worth going. It's a good event. It's great food. And this year they've added a little bit to it. They're giving away 4 raffle items. Now that's not just for attending. I don't mean to mislead anybody. But the tickets are $50 a piece. So if you want to participate and also give while you're there, one of the prizes, which just about everybody in here would be interested in, I would imagine, is the UK-Kansas game. For the 2 lower level tickets to one of the bigger games that you'll see all season long. So if you're able to attend that, RSVP to the place on there. I believe it's Keith. So it's Keith, past district governor. He's going to be taking reservations for that. And it's first come, first serve. I believe you can only get 100, right? Sorry, John?
Yeah, but Dr. Todd will also be speaking at that. Dr. Lee Todd, former president of Northern Kentucky University.
Yes. So that's announcement number one. Number two is just like Art from the Campbell County Club, we came and announced that the current president of MeetNKY is coming to speak at the Wilder City Center. He's going to be coming on November 28th. It's a very good meal. It's $15 per person. I have 6 Florida-Rotarians already RSVP. Is there anybody that wants to RSVP to me today? I can make note of it. John? You do not have to eat, but if you're there, you might as well. Very first week. Okay. Okay. Another thing that is kind of interesting is at the infant stages, so bear with me because the details are still coming. Northern Kentucky International Festival, which is going to be coordinated by the Covington Club, the Rotary Club, is going to be May 18th, 2019. And it's going to feature different ethnic groups, it's going to feature different foods, it's going to feature different music. We are going to participate in the silent auction for that as a club. That's going to be our gift for that event. So kind of put that in here, just it onto that Saturday, May 18th. Don't book that. That's going to be a big thing, is we try to do a signature event for Northern Kentucky, which besides the Bean Bash that Sean helps with, as a club, we would like this to be our signature event. And the Covington Club put this on. Our fourth quarter community sponsorship is Stein Toy Drive. As you may not know, there's a handful of us that do. We put in for 2 district grants. Friday last week, I found out we won both.
Oh, yay!
We won $1,500 from the district for Go Pantry. That will culminate January 6th. We're supposed to raise money all the way until then. And then the next one is the Steiner Toy Drive, which obviously will end the first or second week of December. We're supposed to raise $750 for the club. Unfortunately, it's not a big deal. They didn't give us the full $1,500 for the Steiner Toy Drive. So I have an additional $300 on our side to take care of. I emailed Pat about that today. Did you get that email? Okay. So that is all good news. We got, I don't remember us ever getting 2. That might be the first time, so congratulations, everybody. Lastly, the live auction, November 26th. We now have 7 items, including the Christmas basket in the back. We still need to get those in. We don't have that many days left, to be honest. We get 3 or 4 meetings to collect those. So, in order for that to be a success, we need everybody's full participation. Thank you. And with that, Art and Stephen, would you like to introduce our speaker?
Before Arden does that, would you say something about the sign-up sheets about the basketball game on the table?
Yes.
For the basketball game on November 30th?
I didn't see them on the table. Did you put them on the table, John?
Yes, I did.
Okay. We do have our MeetNKY game still coming up. I have it here. November 30th, MeetNKY versus UMBC. We get all the tickets we want, $9 a ticket. It's a great time. I got to see my tickets myself, so I'm a little prejudiced. But if you could sign up, send those in at the conclusion of the meeting. Thank you. Oh, sorry. My apologies. I've got 5 pieces of paper in front of me. Come on up. This is Ida and Erdoma. We were going to do a flag exchange today, but one of us forgot our flag. It was me. So, come on up.
It's Friday night.
Hi everyone, Ida here with Rotary Exchange. Just wanted to introduce you guys to our student that we have this year. Her name is Velma and she is from Finland. I have a sign-up sheet on all the tables with a couple of her cards on there. And if anyone wants to take her out to any of these events, it would be really great just so she can experience some of what the Northern Kentucky area has for her. Okay? I'll let her introduce herself.
Sure.
Very good idea.
So, my name is Velma. I come from Finland, 17 years old. I go to Ryle here, play basketball, just made the varsity team. Excited
Nice.
for that. Thank you. And I'm very excited for this year. I made a lot of friends already, so it'll be good. Thank you.
about that. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce Julie Kirkpatrick, the Vice President of Sales and Marketing at MeetNKY. Julie Kirkpatrick is the Vice President of MeetNKY, the Northern Kentucky Convention and Visitors Bureau. She is proudly responsible for the economic development of Northern Kentucky communities through meetings, events, and visitor experiences. She is also responsible for the overbrand execution of Northern Kentucky as a destination of choice. I will say, I've seen that a lot lately, like she's really doing a wonderful job. I have to say that's why she's here today. Julie was raised actually in Lexington, Kentucky, and is a certified tourism ambassador for the Cincinnati region. She is the executive bourbon steward, which I'm a big fan of. I don't know how you get to be that, but I'd like to hear more about that.
But wait, there's more.
And a certified destination management executive. She is also the creator of the Bourbon Line, the B line as you see up there, tourism initiative for the region. Julie is a graduate of NKU with the BS in Organizational Leadership and is also an adjunct for the United States Culinary and Hospitality Sciences program. So please join me in welcoming Julie Kirkpatrick.
About 40 miles of where we're standing. The other really cool thing is, and I'm glad that we're out in Boone County today, because who knows about Petersburg Distillery? Does anyone? Okay. So before Prohibition, Petersburg Distillery, right there on the Ohio River, produced the most bourbon of any distillery in the entire state of Kentucky. And that history had been lost, but some great guys over at Boone County Distilling have resurrected that history, and they have created a bourbon distillery around it. So we are very lucky with all of the bourbon distilleries, the bourbon history, the heritage that we have here. So about a year ago, we do tourism. We bring visitors into the state of Kentucky, and we thought, what can we do to put more Kentucky in northern Kentucky? We have some great horses here, but we don't have the pastoral horse farms that central Kentucky has. I love bluegrass music. There aren't a whole lot of venues around here with bluegrass. I make some pretty good barbecue and fried chicken, but again, that's not something that we're really known for. But the bourbon history here is so rich, and we wanted to take advantage of it. So we started to do a little research, and we looked at Scotland. Who are my Scotch drinkers in the room? Yeah, absolutely. Scotch, again, is Scotland's native spirit, very similar to bourbon, which is America's native spirit. Scotland has 126 active distilleries. It's split into 5 very distinct Scotch regions around Scotland, and 30 million people that visit Scotland every year make a distillery part of their experience. And they leave behind a heck of a lot of money in Scotland. And then we looked at the state of Kentucky. There are currently 35 active distilleries in the state of Kentucky, and almost every one of them are centered, with some outliers, between Lexington and Louisville, in that kind of Bardstown, the cradle of bourbon. So, but there are bourbon distilleries all over the state of Kentucky. Who knows how many bourbon distilleries are up here in northern Kentucky? Anybody want to make a guess? 3. There are actually 5. And I want to talk about that just a little bit. But now you have distilleries opening up in Pikeville, Kentucky. You have distilleries in Bowling Green. You have a great new distillery that opened up in Owensboro. So bourbon is starting to spread all over the Commonwealth, as it should, because that limestone shelf that makes bourbon so great because of the water goes through the whole shelf. We need to make the entire state soaked in bourbon. There's a whole, right? Not on Sundays during church. So visitors that go to the Kentucky Bourbon Trail right now, there are about 1.2 million of them. They make Louisville or Lexington their home base. Guess where they fly into? CBG. And I know this for a fact because last year in July, I was in Minnesota, I was in Minneapolis, I was at the Mayo Clinic with a friend, and we were flying home on Frontier. We're hanging out in the airport, it's a Thursday evening, and there are 6 guys, the plane got delayed, it happens, doesn't happen here, but it happens there. But there were 6 guys that were just having a great time and they were laughing. And I'm like, where are you guys going? And they said, the Bourbon Trail. I was like, no way. They're like, yeah, we got $69 flights. It's like, awesome. Where are you staying? Lexington. And I'm like, oh, we have to fix this. So we started to think about what we have in region. We have 70 million cars that go down I-75, 71 over the Brent Spence Bridge every day. A lot of them coming from Canada, further north in Ohio, Michigan. We have 7 million and growing passengers that go through CVG Airport. And of course, if you did not know this, we already have 26.1 million visitors that come to the Cincinnati region every year. We knew we had an audience. So we started to think about what we could do. How can we make Northern Kentucky a first stop for bourbon when people are coming into state? And the underlying idea was also, how can we increase economic development in our 3 counties with new distilleries, new bourbon experiences? So first and foremost, we started to think about what we have in the region. We have New Riff Distilling, which opened in 2014, just released their first bourbon in July. If you didn't see the world's largest bourbon toast out on the Purple People Bridge, it was amazing. They're gonna do it every year. They're gonna do it every year on June the 14th, which is National Bourbon Day. So put that on your calendar for next year. You have Boone County Distilling, which is right out here off of Mount Zion, which is an amazing distillery. And then you have the Old Pogue Distillery, which is in Maysville. Quick little 40, 45 minute, depending if you're driving with me or someone else, drive down Route 8 or the AA. I also want to mention, we have the Neely Family Distillery, which is in Sparta, which is on the 4th turn of the NASCAR track. These guys are 11th generation moonshiners from Owsley County. Their head distiller is 26 years old. Wow. He was making moonshine in his dorm room at UK, selling it to his baseball partners and his frat brothers, and making a lot of money. And guess who busted him? Mom. Because she was like, why aren't you asking us for any money? Well, showed up in his dorm room and here's a still. I guess that answers that question. So instead of punishing him, they built him a distillery, and now he's making bourbon. It's absolutely amazing. And then we have Second Sight Distillery, which is in Ludlow, and these are great guys. They're both from Boone County. They went to Connor. They graduated, went to NKU, got 2 separate degrees. One's graphic design and one is mechanical engineering. So what do you do with that when you graduate from NKU? You go to Vegas and you build the Cirque du Soleil Love Beatles show. And that's what they did. They made a lot of money and they came back here and they bought this great theater in Ludlow, built a still that tells fortunes. It's great. They started making rum, but they're making bourbon now too. So we have these 5 great distilleries, and I keep hearing more and more rumors of more distilleries. We also have a lot of proximity in our region to the heritage members of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. Who's been on the Bourbon Trail before? It's really a good time. So when you think about these big distilleries, you're thinking about the Maker's Mark. We were talking about Bill Samuels, so Maker's Mark, Jim Beam, which is in Claremont, Heaven Hill, Four Roses. These are just really great, big, huge distilleries, and they're all very, very close to us. Buffalo Trace, which is one of my favorite distilleries. If you've never been there in Frankfort, it's absolutely gorgeous. It's 63 miles from where we are right here, and that is not that far away. So we have a proximity to the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. We also have just an absolute array of bars and restaurants that are dedicated to bourbon. Bouquet, which is in Covington. One of my personal favorites, Towsey House, which is right around the corner from my mother-in-law's house. So it was, can we go get some fried green tomatoes, please? Purple Poulet, which is in Dayton, Kentucky. Chandler's, which is in Maysville, as well as the Old Kentucky Bourbon Bar, Wise Guys, Bourbon House 1841. A lot of these are in Main Strasse, which we want to rename that street to Bourbon Street. It's not going over too well in Covington. Maybe someone can help me. As well as the Prohibition Bourbon Bar, which is in Newport. Has anyone ever been to Prohibition? It's right across from Pompilio's. They have more than 1,200 varieties of bourbon rye whiskey. It's a little speakeasy in the back of the coffee house. If you go in there, you'll never forget it. And then the Globe, which is in Covington. But we also have all these associated other bourbon things in region. And I talked about Second Sight in Neely, but there's a great winery in Augusta that's called Baker Burr. And they are taking old Pope barrels and they're putting a Cabernet Sauvignon in them and letting it have a secondary aging. And it's an absolutely amazing wine. And then of course, the biggest attribute that we have in region are these great big, wonderful retail outlet stores like Party Source and Cork and Barrel and Depths, where when visitors come here, and I know this because I've taken Pennsylvanians there and I've taken some Ohioans there, they can't get those bourbons. And they're absolutely blown away, like, oh my God, all we can get is Jim Beam. It's like, well, welcome to bourbon country. So we sat down with the Kentucky Distillers Association. This is a great advocacy group that's based in Frankfurt that advocates on behalf of the bourbon industry, but they also run the bourbon trail. They run both sides of it. They run the main bourbon trail and they run the craft trail. And we talked about the big bourbon trail. The craft trail are these smaller distilleries that when you go in, I think you really get to see the full experience of making bourbon. And I love Jim Beam and I love Maker's Mark, but when you go, you're gonna see a very scripted, very, what they want you to see, but when you go to New Riff, or you go to Boone County Distilling, you're gonna actually probably have to move the distiller out of the way to get to be able to see what's going on. It's much more immersive. So we went to the KDA, we said we wanna do something with bourbon. We wanna build a bourbon experience. And they loved the idea, and they said, we love it so much, we actually wanna designate Northern Kentucky an official gateway trailhead to the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. And we will start promoting you all as the official northern gateway to the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. And that happened in last October. And then they said, you build your bourbon experience and we'll promote that. And it's been a great partnership. It's been going on for about a year now, and we're really happy with how it turned out. So we started to build our bourbon experience, and we put together an advisory committee. And first we went to our 3 judge executives and we said, give us someone from economic development, and they did. We went to the restaurant community and we got a restaurateur to join in. We got the 3 distillers from the 3 Kentucky Bourbon Trail craft tour distilleries and market, New Riff, Boone County Distilling, and Old Poe, to join us on this committee, as well as Molly Wellman. Is there right now Molly? We asked Miss Molly to sit on this, Queen Molly I'm calling her now, to sit on this committee with us, and we started to build this experience. We worked with a local branding agency, and there were a couple things that I personally did not want to see in our experience. I did not want to see the word trail. I think the word trail is overdone. There's a bourbon trail, there's a donut trail in Butler County, there's an oyster trail in Virginia, I think there's a beer trail in every city. So I said, we want to do something that's not trail. We also want to do something that talks about our proximity as the start of bourbon. So we created this thing called the B line, which is really the bourbon line. And the B line is the collection of distilleries, bars, and restaurants. But the B line is truly, the bourbon line is truly the Ohio River. Because when you cross that B line, you are entering the Commonwealth, where 95% of the world's bourbon is made. It's also very, very easy from this area to make a beeline to Buffalo Trace or Woodford Reserve or Wild Turkey, and then make a beeline back up here. We want people to see bourbon further south, but we want them to spend the night here and leave their money here. So there are 12 stops, and I think the line guides are on the table. I put them on the table. They're those red little passports. Those are our line guides. To do the beeline, you're visiting 2 distilleries, 2 bars, and 2 restaurants. And then if you look on the back, there's a website, meetnky.com/redeem, where you upload a picture of yourself holding your stamped beeline guide, and you're gonna get some cool bourbon swag from us. You're gonna get some whiskey stones, or you're gonna get a bourbon glass, or you're gonna get a bourbon coaster, or everyone's favorite, you can also get a t-shirt. You know, I've got some people in my office who are like, everybody wants a t-shirt? So you upload it and you get some bourbon swag. There's no limits to how many times you can do it. We've had one guy that's done it 4 times because he wanted a full set of glasses. Knock yourself out, dude. So he visited 6 places over and over again. And he keeps coming down from Dayton, and I keep sending him glasses, so it works out. So this is a picture of the line guide. This is some what we call out-of-home advertising that's happening up in the Chicago, Detroit area. This is really where we're targeting right now. We're targeting Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh. The weekend before Pittsburgh came in, we saturated their market, and our restaurants and bars saw a 30% increase in bourbon sales over that weekend from Steelers fans coming in. I was not very happy with the turnout of that game, but that's neither here nor there. And then I want to show you this. The real cool thing about the Beeline is, yes, we built it as a tourism enterprise. We want visitors to come in and leave their money, Karen. And they do. They leave on average between $400 and $500 in market when they come. But we also want to see development. So we want to see new distilleries growing. We're having conversations with Triad, which is our regional economic development organization, about how we can, find some site-ready land and be bourbon ready when they're ready to open. There are some folks looking at some land in Florence. There are folks looking at land in Burlington. There are folks looking at land out in my little neck of the woods, Taylor Mill. The funny thing about getting into bourbon is you don't just open a distillery and you have product. You have to wait. You put it in your 53-gallon barrel and you stick it up in a rick house in a warehouse and you wait for the weather to do its magic on the barrel. 4 years. So you have to have a business plan to keep yourself busy in between putting your first barrel in and taking your first barrel out. So tourism is the way to do that. That's one of the ways. Events is the other. Making gin or rum or vodka is another way. Or you can do what our good friends at New Riff did. They bought a bunch of barrels of bourbon. This was their bourbon. This was OKI. This was New Riff's bourbon before New Riff released their bourbon. This is a 12-year-old bourbon. It's absolutely magic. Not that I'm trying to increase raffle sales, but if you love this bourbon, this is a great bourbon. But you can buy sourced barrels and you can bottle in between waiting for your bourbon. But we think tourism is the way to go. So I put this in here about economic development. So that is the Beeline in a nutshell. And I want to open it up if anyone has any questions, because usually questions pop up like, what is bourbon? Yes.
Have you heard of the one downtown Old Union?
Yes.
Is that one? I didn't see that one. I don't remember the name.
In downtown Cincinnati?
Sorry. Downtown Union.
Downtown Union. Okay,
There's
so
such thing.
Union 42 is the bourbon bar that you're talking about. So let's talk about how we expand the Beeline. Thank you. It's like I paid you to segue me. Perfect. So we are actually getting ready to go into an expansion phase on the Beeline, and we built an application to join the Beeline. So let's talk about what it takes to become a bourbon bar or bourbon restaurant on the Beeline. Number one, if you're a restaurant, you have to have at least 50 varieties of bourbon that you shelf. You have to offer bourbon flights. You have to have bourbon-infused menu items. As well, you also have to go to something called Moonshine University. And Aaron had actually just talked about this. So Moonshine University it's a school in Louisville where they teach you how to distill bourbon. They also offer something called the Executive Bourbon Steward class, which is a day-long class full of drinking bourbon, making bourbon, smelling bourbon, tasting bourbon, and then you have to take a test. And if you have to pass the test, and you become an executive bourbon steward.
Oh my God.
I am an executive bourbon steward. It was the greatest day of my life. Except for this. You make bourbon, and if you don't know, bourbon is one of the most highly taxed industries in the country. So you make bourbon, you're taxed on it. As soon as you put it in the barrel, you're taxed. Every year taxed on it. So you made this great bourbon at Moonshine University. And at the end of the day, they dump it down the drain. And you're just crying. Because there goes that, right? Like, oh, but they don't want to pay taxes on it, and I understand that. And you can't take it home with you because you don't want to pay taxes and you don't have a distiller's license. So it's a full day class. So everyone that is on the Beeline has to go through this thing called Stave and Thief training. That's the executive bourbon steward. It's not cheap. It's about $1,000 to go to training. The bars have to have 100 bourbons, do flights. They also have to bring distillers in to do events, and they also have to go through stave and thief training. To be a distillery on the V line, you have to be admitted to the Kentucky Bourbon Trail Craft Tour. So that's why you said there's 3, and there are 3 Kentucky Bourbon Trail Craft Tour distilleries. There are 2 that are trying to get their production up to become craft tour distilleries. And I just got an email last week on the download. The Neely Family Distillery is going to be joining the Kentucky Bourbon Trail Craft Tour in the next month or so. So they will join the V line in January. So Union 42 has not filled out an application yet, and I'm talking to him, and I think he's trying to wrap his head around how to do it, because I love his bar. If you haven't been out there, Union on 42, it's right next to the Farm Stand Cafe. It is out of this world. Yes, Senator.
Tell me a little bit about your governance. Are you underneath the Northern Kentucky Visitors Convention Center, or are you completely separate?
We are. So I work for the Northern Kentucky Convention and Visitors Bureau. I'm the Vice President of Sales and Marketing. This is a marketing program that we created, but we built an advisory committee that stands outside of our current board governance. So the advisory committee, it consists of the 3 judge executives designees, as well as members from the industry.
How big is your board for the V line?
The V line, it's about 12 people right now.
And who appoints them? How do they get there?
Really, we talk about it through the judge executives. We've got John Stanton, Chris Courtney, and Will Weber from Boone, Campbell, and Kenton County. So we want to make sure that we're including someone from restaurants, bars, the distilleries, and then we have 2 members from hotels as well that are joined in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes?
I think the craft distilleries must be given the other distilleries, because we're Maker's Mark ambassadors for a long time. Really good program that they've had, and been good to us. But we were getting more promotion events in this area for Maker's Mark. And then we went to a bourbon.
You're welcome.
But we went to bourbon tasting over at DAF.
Yeah.
And they had their master distiller in.
Yep.
And plus they had waffles from Marty's Waffles, best food truck in the region,
Yes,
making
it
bourbon
is.
flavored waffles.
Agree
But
with you,
anyway,
Pat.
what Makers is doing now, they're doing like a craft bourbon. They're taking different staves, different types of wood, putting in bourbon barrel for like a week. And like they had 5 different bourbons, they made out 1 barrel bourbon basically.
Yeah, they did a secondary maturation on a lot of their 46, their Maker's 46, and it's good stuff.
It is.
But I like it because I think that's the future of bourbon, is this experiment. And it doesn't just have to be bourbon, it could be, I don't want to trump on New Riff, but New Riff's gonna make some really cool experimental whiskeys that are gonna start coming out soon. And that's why they're New Riff. So things like 100% malted rye, which is not something you traditionally taste today, but it's gonna be out of this world. But yeah, I love that Maker's Mark is finally paying attention to us up here, because I feel like I've been to Loretto a whole lot. So I'm glad they're coming up here now.
And we always went down there when we went to an event. Usually it was Maker's Day at Keeneland, is when we went, and they had a whole weekend of it, but just,
Yeah.
it's nice to see them at this place.
It is, it really is. Are there any other questions that I can answer? Yes, sir.
2 things. You said, one thing is just clarification. You said 70 million cars a day?
A year.
Okay, you said a day.
Yo, I'm sorry, I apologize.
That's fine.
That poor
But
little
it
bridge,
seems like-
that poor little bridge would give up the ghost.
Well, it seems like there's 70 million between
Try and
our
get to Cincinnati in the middle of the afternoon.
Yeah. it feels
Second
like something
thing, like the university, Bourbon University or whatever this now, Louisville, when I went to breathalyzer technician school,
Oh,
we also drank bourbon,
yes,
and we also had a test.
yes.
So, when you're on the bourbon trail, you need to try to avoid that breathalyzer.
You do. So let's talk about responsibility, because that is actually very important to us. Our brand is Find Your Sipping Point. FindYourSippingPoint.com is our website. If you look on our website, the very first thing it says on there is that you should enjoy your Kentucky bourbon like a true Kentuckian, responsibly. And you should find your sipping point. You shouldn't fall over your sipping point or fall into a sipping hole. But one really great thing about this region is that we have a very robust taxi, ride share, A lot of these stops on the Beeline are also within walking distance, but if they're not within walking distance, if you're going from Boone County Distilling to Towsey House, Uber is a great alternative, so is Lyft, and it's all about being responsible. Yes?
If you go to opening night of the Stephen Foster store,
Oh, yeah, Bardstown.
they have, all you can drink bourbon.
Yeah,
If you pay the extra fee for
I think
the
that's a bad idea.
appetizer. It's a good idea. Believe me, it's all the local bourbon stuff.
it is, and Bardstown does such a great job, and there's a reason that Bardstown is the epicenter of bourbon industry. They are the capital of the bourbon industry of the world, regardless of what Louisville would like to think, but it really is Bardstown. But yeah, all you can drink bourbon, could never get my money's worth out of that, because I'm a sipper. Are there any other questions? Oh gosh, thank you so much for having me come out today and tell you a little bit about the Beeline, and again, it's findyoursippingpoint.com, and thank you so much.
We tried one of that bourbon tours when we first moved here.
All right, get out your wallets. You ready? Before I start the auction for the bottle of bourbon here, did you want to tell anything else about this bottle that may be relevant?
Sure, okay. So, like I said, this is OKI. This was produced by New Rip. This was actually made by MGP in Indiana. This is a high rye bourbon. Most bourbon is at least 51% corn, and then they use a flavoring grain, either wheat or rye. This is obviously a rye. This is a higher percentage of rye as well. Typical rye percentages are between 8 and 15%. This one's closer to 25. So it's also got 12 years of age on it. So it's got a lot of caramel. It's got a lot of character. This is also bottle number 30 of 129 bottles that were pulled out of this barrel. This is a single barrel bourbon. It is not diluted at all. It's actually almost 116 proof. Yeah, so it'll wake you up.
It's not for breakfast.
Your sipping point.
And the last thing I want to say about this is you cannot get this anymore. This is actually a very rare item to be able to find right now. This is a barrel that Molly Wellman and I picked out. We sampled like 3 or 4 barrels, and then finally Ken Lewis said, "You're just drinking my whiskey. Pick a barrel." So this is a good one.
Anybody who's a bourbon lover, I've got quite a few of those friends, and the holidays coming up. Has to be a really good friend for this price that we hope that's going for. For a $200 bottle of bourbon, do I have any opening bids? I'll bid 50. All right, if I get it for 50, I would appreciate it.
60.
Thanks, John.
75.
75 for Donald. 90. 90 for Donald.
100.
100 for Adam. 120 for Jim. Anybody want to be 120? Arden, 130. It's a $200 bottle. Not a very good auction here, though. Going once. 140. 140 for Donald. Going once. Twice.
Arden wants it. Arden wants
This ball.
150 for Arden, going once, going twice.
Go ahead, John.
Sold. Don't forget, next week, we're gonna have a board meeting for all the board members. Immediately after this meeting, everybody who's gonna be there. We'll start about 1:10, 1:15, and we'll be done by 2:10. And then, before actually, I'm gonna ring the bell and dismiss, but get everybody migrate this way so we get a picture of the group for World Fully. Thanks, have a great week.